Hi there, nice to be with you. Happy you could stick around.
1, 2, 3, kick! Come on, everybody. Clap your hands. Ooh, you're looking good. Are you having a good time? Yeah. I sure am.
Yes, indeed. You are looking good. Hi, I'm Ira Robbins, host of the Trouser Press Books podcast. Welcome to our second episode. This week, we're focusing on the novel King Cal by Peter McDade. Welcome to the show, Peter. Tell us a little bit about the book.
King Cal was inspired by a Zoom book group discussion of Mrs. Dalloway, which I'd never read because I was always terrified of Virginia Woolf. That was 24 hours in the life of Mrs. Dalloway. We really enjoyed the book. I really liked the way that it showed over how the course of one day, all your past stuff is still there. Like we never, even when we're in the present, we're also living in the past. But she had no money issues at all. Like the biggest monetary crisis was a dress that needed to be repaired. And could the maid repair it in time for the party? So I mused out loud to my Zoom friends that it would be great if we saw a book like that, but it was in the life of somebody for whom money on top of everything else was this stressor. And I thought of a young fast food worker, considering that I also spent several years as a young fast food worker who was trying to be a musician at night. That seemed like to me a natural fit. For the first time, I had the structure first. Normally structure comes to me later once I've started writing, but I knew it would be 24 hours. And I knew it would start and end with the first drive-through order of the day at 6 a.m. And then they just had to figure out what else happens over the course of that day.
You started as a professional musician. I mean, obviously you started as a non-professional musician first, but you had a couple of albums on major labels in the 90s, 80s?
Yes and yes. We put out 7 records all together, 2 with major labels and the rest with indies, including the world famous DB Records here in Atlanta.
And that was Uncle Green, right?
It was Uncle Green. We started in 9th grade in New Jersey. We were all in the same hometown. And then we moved to Atlanta to be big rock stars when we graduated high school.
At what point did you stop pursuing that dream of being a rock star and become something else?
We stubbornly persisted up until early 30s. So from the time I was 18 and graduated high school up until, say, 31. We'd had a major label and lost it. And we had another major label contract and we lost that. Almost signed a third time with MCA. We were going to go up to Woodstock and make a record. The contract was going back and forth, and the guy who was going to sign us got fired, which is such a familiar story. It's almost like, come on, you can't do better than that.
Right.
And at that point, one of the guys in the band had a wife who was pregnant. I'd taken a few classes at college, and I was kind of tired. So the 4 of us met, and the question before the band was, who is still willing to sacrifice everything else for the band? Because that had always been that's the only way to really go for it. And at 3-1, we're saying we can't do that anymore. So we retired, and I went to college and got a master's in history.
And at what point did you start writing fiction?
3rd grade. It started with, I fancied myself a satire writer. So I had a spoof of Star Wars called Star Wars. I had a spoof of Sherlock Holmes called Sherlock Homely. Like, even when the band was happening, you have a lot of downtime in a band. The weeks at home waiting to make a record or to go back on the road. And I started writing what I called novels. I realize now they were just practice swings. Like I would type it up, and I'd type it a second time, and that would be my revision, and I would say, it's done. And I have a box of them. In grad school, I began to think more seriously about what I would do next. I didn't want to get an MFA, but I did get to take one graduate level fiction workshop. It was the first time I'd been around people who really took writing and revision seriously. And I began to write a bunch of short stories that still weren't very good, but they were closer to what I imagined could be published.
Mm-hmm.
And those turned into The Weight of Sound, which was my first novel, which was 12 stories that sort of stand together individually, but add up to what feels like a novel, like linked stories, I think you would call it, from beginning to end.
You have experience as a fast food worker that's relevant to King Cal. When was that?
When we moved to Georgia, we all needed disposable jobs so that we could work nights, so we could play nights and practice. We all lived in the same house. It's actually the house I use for Calvin in the book. It's 4630 Central Drive in Stone Mountain. Like it's the same, the layout of that house is the house we lived in. My first job was at Western Sizzlin', which was a steakhouse, and I was supposed to bake the potatoes and match them to the steak. It was hellacious. I can still smell the plate. It was worse than fast food. The advantage of the Burger King was that I could walk to it because quite often we would be down to one or maybe no cars between the four of us. I could always get to Burger King by 5:30 a.m. to clock in. It's true that if you show up consistently, like when you're supposed to, stay as long as you're supposed to, you really do pretty quickly be able to set whatever hours you want. And so I could always get nights and weekends off.
In King Cal, the name of the restaurant is Burger Buddies. Is that based on a Burger King, or is it something more out of your
Very
imagination?
much based on a Burger King, but I didn't want it to be an exact restaurant. I like the idea of it being fictional but recognizable. And I also like the idea of a place called Burger Buddies. You know, we make good food and we make good friends.
Were you ever a fan of fast food? Do you eat at Burger King?
No, no. Then you have kids and they like to stop at these fast food places on road trips. And the adults realize that they're better off like making a sandwich and bringing that because digestively it just does not work.
There's a band in the book that Cal's musical partner joins for a while called 143. Were they modeled after anybody in particular? Because to me, it felt like Collective Soul.
End of a long day, end of a long week. I got nothing to say, but we don't need to speak.
Collective Soul is a good guess and actually explains kind of the concept I was thinking of. Whereas if you're in a town and you're in the musical community, you are all rooting for each other, but it's almost like you're rooting for each other unless somebody you don't think is quite as good as you are begins to make it. Cal is young, he's a little judgmental, and he views 143 as not being as good as what he and Grady are making on Lords of the Living.
Mm-hmm.
And so that Grady can go off with them and instantly make more money than the two of them have ever made just being a side guy drives Cal nuts. And my goal was for the reader to read that and both understand Cal's frustration and his kind of looking down on this band, but then also hear the music and watch the other crowd reaction and think, well, there must be something there to explain why they have so much success. I wanted to be a band that Calvin would legitimately be confused by, but also when the listener hears them on the soundtrack, the listener at the same time can understand, well, actually, they're not terrible, right? You know, so we see that it's this disconnect in Calvin's head of, why are they making it and he's not? And also he doesn't like the lead singer who's got his own issues. And so there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's just the idea of like a competitor who makes it before you do. And
So as someone who had been a professional musician and done a fair amount of touring, how much of Calvin's experiences as a musician were things you already knew, and how much were things you had to kind of like update in your mind from when you had been doing it to when Calvin, more or less in the present tense, is doing it?
the recording is much different. And so Calvin is what I would consider like a bedroom pop guy. So he's got a laptop and a couple of microphones and maybe one real amp. And that's all you need. And you're making stuff that sounds, I mean, aside from that, it's programmed drums and not real drums, because he doesn't have a drum set in his apartment. But the quality of sound that you can get from the software and a MacBook is just nothing we had at our disposal. We had a 4-track that we recorded on demos at home. And then we learned how to bounce them down so that you could get 7 tracks. You bounce down to 1, you get 3 more. The trade-off of quality, like the whole thing in terms of quality and pain in the assness of it all Right. So I had to get updated for that. And I have some friends who do this kind of recording. Really, the biggest change for me between Calvin and me is that Calvin is writing the songs, and that's something I don't do and I didn't do. The lyrics I did, and I wrote the lyrics for this, but that's where I couldn't really add the songwriting part of the book until the second or third draft. I was able to get more detail because I knew who Calvin was better. And it's more just kind of taking what I do when I write fiction and trying to imagine how Calvin's brain would do that, something similar to write music.
One of the things that really attracted me to King Cal was the exploration of the creative process. I mean, as a music journalist, I've always been absolutely fascinated by the way people create music, what it takes to pull something out of nothing and make something that will last for centuries. What I like about King Cal especially was the depth to which you went about the thought processes that go into writing songs. So I love that. I admire what you did there.
Oh, good. I'm glad it works. I mean, I'm a big what we call I call it the process book or movie or TV show. Like I'm all in. There's a British show where people make pottery, and I don't know anything about pottery, but I love to watch them. It always starts with this big lump of clay and they throw it down on the table and they have to, it's a contest. So they've all been given the same thing, and watching them all try to approach this, I just find fascinating. Like you said, in this case, it's a lump of clay into a bird bath. Like, I don't know how they do that, but I'll watch it all day long. I knew in writing this that I also love that part. And I also think it's important for Calvin's character that we see that. I know that some people might not be as into it, and maybe those are the pages they kind of flip over, but for others, it might be those are the pages where because it's that moment of seeing, like you said, it's something appearing out of nothing.
As writers, you and I both share similar experience of actually creating something out of nothing. But to me, putting words in sequence doesn't feel as huge a break with nothingness as writing a song does. I mean, I could write lyrics if I had to, as obviously you can, but I couldn't write a melody to save my life. Like everything I would think of would be something I'd already heard or something that doesn't sound good or doesn't make any sense musically. So the fact that millions of people over thousands of years have been able to put notes in sequences and in rhythms that are unique, or at least more or less unique, that to me is a miracle.
But I do think there's a similarity between the novel construction and, say, maybe not the original melody construction, but I compare novels now to putting together records. You have more stuff than you need sometimes, and you've got to get rid of stuff you really love, or you put it all together and you realize there's still that one thing that's still missing. Being able to throw everything, my first draft is everybody comes to the party, anything goes, and ideally when you're making a record, it's like somebody has some idea for an extra guitar part. You don't instantly say no, even though in your brain you're thinking it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. They go out there and try it. Seconds in, everybody knows either it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard, but you shut your lip because it's like, oh, okay, that was a good idea.
Mm-hmm. So now you actually have taken the creative step of having a soundtrack for this book. Why don't you explain a little bit about how you went about that?
This is the third book, and all three have had soundtracks, even though after the first, I swore I would never do it again. With this one, I knew it would right away because he was a singer-songwriter. Since he's a bedroom pop guy, I wanted somebody for the music who would be able to create music that sounds the way I think Calvin's music sounds in his head. So I have a friend who lives in California named Chris Hauk, who records under the name Norway House, and I play drums on his stuff a lot. He'll send me an MP3 and I play along and send it back. And luckily he writes a lot of music. And I said, well, I need a couple of songs for this record. How many? So I wanted 6 originally. We wound up with 7. It was different this time. Usually I send the lyrics to somebody and they come up with the melody and we work back and forth. Chris writes the music first. If I usually had a chorus in mind, and he would try to work that around. And then he would ba, ba, ba for the verse. And I would try to take the words Calvin's been working on and shape them to match that melody. And we'd go back and forth that way.
The lyrics were done first. I mean, because you wrote them in the book, right?
The choruses were usually done first. The verses not. And then what's interesting, and this has happened every time I've I've done a book and a soundtrack. When I get the music, so the book initiates the creation of the music with the words in the chorus usually and what I think the song sounds like. And then I get the song and it can then shape the book because I have more idea of what the lyrics are because they're going to match the melody and they can go into the book. There's a song in the book where there's a demo version and a finished version. And that only happened when Chris wound up with two versions of this song and we liked them both. I'm like, well, it's a key song in the book. And to have the time to spend the demo and then the finished thing actually wound up for me really helping. It really helps. It's a key moment in Calvin's whole arc. And we get to spend some more time there watching that take place.
How did you convey to Chris what the songs should sound like? Because honestly, they don't sound, I heard the music well after I'd read the book, and they don't sound to me like I imagined. They work, and they do fit the book, and it's fine. But in my head, I think I was thinking more kind of like a stripped down Tears for Fears. The actual songs are a little more kind of bedroom pop than that.
Open me up. It's not quite anthemic, but that chorus is kind of big and lifts up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Watching Mary Sleep, I wanted to be more like a little closer to his Elliott Smith mode, moodier, digital meltdown. I knew they were trying to write a new closing song, so it had to have that kind of like, this is what we're going to end our set with, that kind of feel.
Up the stairs, smell of rust soaking our skin, just us two, and we never would want it any other way. We thought that time was a lie, that we could close our eyes and never have to leave. We thought that we could just hide, that the world we had made is all we'd ever see. We'd be alone.
Why don't you explain how Trouser Press Books came to publish King Cal?
I read the New Yorker, and the New Yorker, there's a little talk of the town piece on Trouser Press, which was beginning to publish books, Trouser Press Books, and Ira Robbins. I believe that you explained something like most of the books you're publishing were nonfiction music books, but you were looking also for music novels or music adjacent novels or something like that. And I was looking for a home for King Cal. So I emailed Ira. You must have just been like one of those lucky coincidences where like you were right there because like an hour later you wrote back like, that sounds like fun. Send me a few pages. So I sent you a few pages and then you asked for the whole thing. I don't know, a couple of weeks later you read it and said, give me a call. Sounds good.
What I remember liking at first was the fast food setting. I just thought it was just so greasy. I don't know. It just felt like it felt real and exciting and kind of like cinematic. I mean, you could sort of see all the moving parts of the restaurant,
Yep.
you know, and the fact that Cal was kind of like a surly kid, you know, and a bit, you know, cynical and stuff. It had that high fidelity kind of record store vibe to it, although it was set in a fast food restaurant, and it just kind of appealed to me. I mean, I don't think I've been in a fast food restaurant in a while, although I have to confess, when my wife Christina was working on the cover for this book, and we had this idea that we would do some sort of a greasy bag to convey the fast food side of it. I went around the neighborhood to fast food restaurants to try to buy a bag that we could grease up.
It's very hard for unagented authors to get people to read the manuscripts. And it's not like I wouldn't want to be with some huge publishing house, but the truth is that the years in the music industry have, what I walked away thinking was a small label, a small press, a smaller press that really gets it is worth much more than the larger label.
Mm-hmm.
Because Atlantic is a huge machine, right? The guy who signed this went to his office, you have a home here forever, yada, yada, yada. Our record came out the same like month as the first Tori Amos record, which took off. And that was it. We went to the office on tour and like all we saw was Tori Amos posters. It's like, where's our fucking poster? Like we had disappeared because we became the tax write-off because you release a bunch of stuff and if one takes off, it can fund the whole operation.
But anyway, I'm very happy that we're publishing King Cal, and I hope it does really well. And thank you for spending a little time with me here today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having the book.
Yay.
Yay.
King Cal is out April 16th from Trouser Press Books. Order it from us, order it from Amazon, order it from Barnes & Noble, get the ebook from Apple, do all that good stuff. And listen to the soundtrack on Bandcamp. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye.